We had a guy reach out the other day. I don't know where this fella has been, but he said, guys, I need to start a show that I've never watched before. Should I watch The Office, It's Always Sunny, and what was the third one, John?
I want to say it was Parks and Rec, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, or like Arrested Development. Like, what are the other like iconic comedies? And we were like, dude, first of all, how the fuck is that even possible that you've never seen any of those? But the consensus was, out of all those, because they're all great, pick The Office because it's the most culturally relevant. Like, you'll get the jokes, you'll understand references. There are lines that you've been probably just laughing at parties that you're going to realize are from The Office. So It really is like that important of a show.
Well, part of why I started this podcast, An Oral History of The Office, is kind of based on what you said, but it was really wanting to look at why. Like, it was all based on a question, like a true like exploration, which is, we haven't filmed the show in 7 years. The last scene was filmed 7 years ago. Yet, by any metric that anyone can show me, it is the most watched show in television today. I'm talking new shows that launching on NBC Thursday night now, or Netflix or whatever. And you look at the numbers, and the numbers are they are mind-boggling. Like the first day of the shutdown, Sunday, March the 15th, they kind of call that the first day. 250 million minutes were streamed on Netflix alone on that day.
That day,
which is an incredible. I mean, like,
no, I don't even understand it. Like, what is that?
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. It's like 82 billion minutes in 2018. These numbers make no sense. Yeah. And I'm talking to Rainn Wilson during the podcast about this, and I'm saying these numbers, and he's like, "What? This is not like that's can't even." And so it's not just like The Office is popular today. It's that The Office is more popular today than when we were on at 9 o'clock on Thursday nights and the top scripted show on NBC.
Right.
But it's like, between The Office and anything else that's on, there is such an enormous gap. It's truly mind-boggling. Yeah. So it was really about going like, okay, why? Like, why is it so popular? Why has it had endured? Why do all of these, 13, 14, 12, 11-year-olds, why are they watching it? And they don't even know it was ever on NBC. They're like, have you seen the Netflix show?
Yeah.
And so going back and really examining the decisions that were made early on about casting, about bringing in, certain key creatives. And if we can find any clues then as to why it has endured so well and so successfully and is bigger today than it was then.
If you had to pick one thing that you think is the majority reason for that, what do you think it is?
Well, I'm not going to give up the end of the podcast, but I'll tell you two things that are, I think, contribute to it. One is, I think that when we were doing the show, right? We're doing the show and we're like, we're almost canceled forever too, which is another thing we talk about, because people on Netflix are like, they did 200 whatever up. And it's like, no. We did 6 and we were dead. And then we had one guy risk his entire career, and we got 6 more, or a total of 12. And then we were dead. And then all of these things happen. But when we were there and we were like, is it going to stay on or whatever? I remember there was some like log line that we had. I don't remember the numbers, but it was like, there are 200 million Americans who work in offices, right? So if a certain percentage of those people like this show, we're going to be good to go, right? That was the idea. I think in the end, maybe that's true, but that's not why it's successful. It's that young people are watching it. It's that the subversive nature of the show and the comedy of the show, that we were not making it for them, but
that's everything. Getting the youth in, right?
The experience of sitting in a school classroom with a potentially unreasonable boss / teacher sitting next to people that you haven't chosen to sit next to. And if you're going through year after year and year, it's the same kids every year in school that you're stuck with. And there's little Johnny who picks his nose, and there's, bitchy Sarah, and there's, like the archetypes that exist there.
Right.
And that idea of being stuck together with a group of people, I think, translated in a way that we were not intending, but that did.
Yeah, I mean, when you get a song, a show, some clothes, style, whatever, the best thing to do is get like the young weirdos to pick it up. The young weird kids who are just like, yeah, this is cool, and they decide what's cool and funny. But I do think there's an element of like, it's if you work in a corporate setting, you get it.
Yes.
And even if you don't work in one, that setting is
it's very universal. Because I've never worked in a corporate setting, and I love that show. I fell in love with that show. I know the exact episode. It was I forget the name of it now, but it was season 1. It was the race relations day.
Diversity day, yeah.
The title of the episode is. But like, I had a friend come into my dorm in high school and be like, "You gotta watch this episode." And like right away, everything clicked. I was just in high school, and I was like, yeah, I get this. The paradigm here works for sure.
Right. There's another, the second thing that I was going to say, which this was a new discovery for me on the podcast for sure. And we discussed this, but if you are you watch The Last Dance, Michael Jordan documentary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you watch a documentary, it by definition cannot be dated because you're looking at a specific time and place, right? So you don't look at a documentary about the 70s and go like, oh my God, that's so dated, right? Because you're looking at a documentary about the 70s. And of course they're going to have 70s style hair and they're going to have whatever. And so I think the other thing was that it was shot as a documentary, that it exists in this time and place. You don't ever think that. You don't ever go like, oh, and Greg Daniels, who was the creator, talked to me some about like not wanting to put too much like current pop culture reference, like not wanting to sort of date it specifically in that way, but in terms of technology and the use of the computers and the computers that we have and all that stuff, it's fucking old, right? But the fact that the way it was shot that way is like, oh, we're looking at these people in this slice of life.
And you know what? All right, the computers, sure. And phones probably. But other than that, like office clothes is still shirts and ties and
that's
lane
Scranton.
And
right.
Yes, I mean, when you look at that, you don't go like, oh, that's so early 2000s. You'll never. That is universal. And that mockumentary vibe, I think we almost take that for granted because it just became what The Office and then Parks and Rec and other shows kind of did. But that at least in America, that was like the first one to really hit. And that's a huge part of it too, where you feel like you're watching reality, but you're not. It's scripted. It's perfect.
Totally. Yeah. And, we talk about that too. I in the podcast, in fact, the 3rd episode is called Everything That Makes It Harder Makes It Better. And the reason that we call that episode that, one is it kind of is a tease if that's what she said, but the idea, this was a quote that I guess Greg Daniels talked to our director of photography at the time. And the idea that in the show, that it is shot, everything, nothing is faked. So in other words, if it's a documentary and we have 2 cameras and they're moving around and they're shooting everybody, right? You don't ever see a spot. Let me break it down. Michael Scott is talking in front of the conference room, right? So we have a shot on Michael Scott, right? And then we have another shot on the people who are sitting, listening to him and talking to him and responding, right? So the easiest way, how most television shows would shoot, is we would shoot Steve Carell, and then we would stop, and then there would be a camera that would stand right where Steve Carell was, right? Because that's a straight shot back at everybody else that's watching. That's how it would be shot. 100% of the time, that's how you would shoot that scene. But they said no, because if we do that, where is the camera who's shooting them? He would be standing in front of Michael Scott. We can't have the camera there. Because if this scene were happening in real time, like a documentary, we would see that camera. So having to find different angles, strange angles, corners, moving around pillars that, through plants, all of those things were taken from reality TV and truly made the show way more difficult to shoot, but also gives it that vibe that you're like spying in, you're like leaning in, wanting to see stuff. And so that's one of the things that we talk about in the podcast, about the things that people would never think about.
Oh, you would never pick that up.
Never think of, never.
And you don't even realize that it's making it better, but it is.
It is. And so you go back and if you start looking at those things and the weird angles that it's shot from that you don't think about, you're like, oh yeah. Like, and that was a rule. I mean, that was like a hard, fast, like rule. The example I'll very quickly in the podcast they talk about is there were two guys and they were from reality TV and they called it the dance, right? So they're moving, one guy moves this way, the other guy counters this way, and they're kind of watching each other out of the corner of their eye. And they would talk about going into Michael's office, right? So Michael and let's just say Dwight goes in the office and Michael's charging ahead into the office and there's a camera behind him and he's following him into the office. And what they would have was the other camera guy would be behind the door. Right. And so they would come in, you would see that shot. And then as soon as it passed the door would close and the camera guy would come out there. Right. You would never think about that. You would never see that. But that's the only way that they could make it work. So as you're watching it, you're seeing not something shot perfectly framed. You're seeing people having to fight and get around things for a shot, which I think made it better.
Yeah, well, that's what we were I think what we were saying in the beginning is like, that's fucking awesome and intricate and detailed and like the art of it all. And people think it's, that's what she said. And it's a lot more the dance.
Right.